was about 10 or 11, my sister, who would have been about 15, and I brought my brother, who would have been about 2 at the time, to the beach down the road from our holiday home. Just to add to, this beach had a massive car park just in front of it, as it was often very busy during the summer. Anyway, I'd been swimming for a while, and when I was done, I went up to one of the shower things to rinse myself off. My sister and brother were waiting up there for me, my brother being in his pram. I'd been wearing a wetsuit because it was absolutely freezing. Thank you, Ireland. So I asked my sister could she zip the back of it down, as I wasn't able to reach it myself. The thing is, though, is that the shower area was on a slope, so there was no way that she would have been able to bring the buggy down, so she brought it as close to the edge as she could, which was no more than a foot or two away. She gave my brother one last look before turning to me and pulling down my wetsuit. This task took her no more than 10 seconds, I would say, but when she turned around, my brother and his buggy were gone. Of course, she immediately started panicking, looking around the area to find him. The next thing I knew, she took off running, screaming at people to help her. It was only when I looked that I saw this old man trying to put my brother into his car, an older woman in the driver's seat with the engine started. I could see that the distance between my sister and the car was quite a bit, and there was no way that she was going to get there before they took off. And even if she did, I'm not sure how much she would have been able to do. So she kept screaming as she ran down the footpath, trying to get the attention of as many people as she could. To this day, I honestly thank God for a random man and his wife standing near this car. He heard my sister screaming about our brother and the man putting him into his car. The man ran to the car and tried pulling my brother out of this would-be snatcher's arms, while his wife rang the police. Luckily, he managed to get my brother out of the man's arms before handing him off to my sister, who had just gotten to them seconds beforehand. And honestly, to this day, I don't know how it happened, but the would-be snatchers managed to get away, driving away from the beach. When the police arrived, my sister and the man who helped us gave as much as they could in relation to the descriptions of the 2 people, but they couldn't even get any license plate number as the car had gone at this stage. I still think about it to this day, and the one thought that always crossed my mind was, what would have happened if the man wasn't there to help us? I don't think that I would have had a little brother after that, if that would have been the case. The year was 2014. I'm a white American on a college economics trip to South Africa. The main focus was the apartheid, but included a separate side trip to Mozambique to witness the Soviet Union's impact on the country. Our trip was led by an influential economic Russian advisor, and he found the safest way to see Mozambique was by the way of a cruise ship off the South African coast. Cue our first exhibition of the ship, a day trip to the capital of Mozambique. The bus ride was exciting and informative. We were able to learn some history, see where Blood Diamond was filmed, etc. After about 30 minutes or so in the bus, we were driven into the city centre, and people were immediately banging on the windows as they saw a bus full of tourists and were eager to sell their handcrafts. This didn't bother me in the least, as I understood the economic situation was not ideal here, and opportunity knocks. Upon exit of the bus, we were presented with a map of tourist attractions for foreigners. Picture it as like A, B, C, D, respectively labelled as church, statue, cemetery, market. A, B, and C were all in the city square, but D was one street up and to the left. Our group, Russian professor and 10 students, 8 girls and 2 boys, wandered around sites A, B, and C with wide eyes, as this was a very foreign environment, and we were eager to soak it all in. Come time, we finished exploring the city square, and we're ready to head up the street to the listed market. That's D. Blindly trusting and following the front half of the group, I just sort of wandered, slowly realizing that the environment around me to be more and more suspicious. The empty streets of the city centre turned into smaller, sort of busier side streets, full of merchants selling what they could for a buck. Off the top of my head, I remembered deconstructed cell phones, sold for parts, a variety of what seemed to be lost shoes, only 1 shoe per pair for sale, and a sort of mixed match of spices. Mesmerized by the sights and the sounds around me, I was completely blind to the body language of many people passing by. Not until a local woman grabbed my arm specifically and asked me sternly, "What are you doing here?" I frantically pull out my map and say, "Oh, we're going to the market, here, D." She looks at me with urgency and tells me to immediately return to where I've come from, as they are planning to take me. While this all sounds very cryptic, please understand that I'm a blonde, white female in a foreign country in a group with only 3 other men. I am not culturally unaware, but I guess I had a false sense of security due to our little map. So I immediately notified my teacher, to which he replied, "Oh yes, maybe we are lost," and we headed safely back to the bus. But the horror of a possible kidnapping, it still haunts me to this day. I'm forever thankful too to that woman who warned me specifically because I have a big mouth and I'm afraid her threats may have fallen silent had she warned another girl in our group. I've travelled around the world before and after this encounter too, but nothing sticks in my mind so deeply as that day. Thankfully, it's taught me to be even more vigilant, and I hope anyone listening to this, that they'll do the same. These events occurred 2 summers ago in the Grand Teton area. So, my boyfriend at the time, now husband, I'll call him H for this particular story, was an avid outdoorsman and also served in the military. I was an ecology major and wanted to spend more time outdoors, so he decided to take me on my first backpack, just the 2 of us. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Grand Tetons are well known for their wildlife, specifically grizzly bears too. My only experience with bears up to this point was watching a little black bear cross the road from the safety of my car. Seeing grizzly country signs around every corner wasn't doing much to help my nerves for sure. But anyway, on to the first incident. So my boyfriend looked like Indiana Jones, machete hanging from his belt, large knives attached to each side of the pack, bear spray strapped to his waist. You get the picture. The beginning of our 25-mile journey was all uphill. And when in bear country, you're not supposed to make too much noise as to not startle the wildlife by accidentally sneaking up on it. And as you can imagine, going uphill while carrying a 40-pound pack makes it pretty difficult to make conversation. We were an hour in though, and almost at the top of the ascent, when I noticed that the woods had just gone completely silent, save for the rushing stream that was to our left of the trail. Silent woods, from my experience, are never a good sign. This usually indicates predators nearby. And at this point, I was in front of my boyfriend and we were about to crest the hill. For the past 20 minutes we had not said a word to each other, having been too tired to speak. We noticed the silence at the same time and we gave each other a sort of knowing glance. I came up over the top of the hill and I immediately froze. Sitting, not even 10 feet in front of me, in the middle of the trail, was a grizzly bear. My husband wasn't aware yet, as he was behind me, so I did the first thing that I could think of. While still in my frozen stance, I managed to take my arm and started flinging it wildly behind me, trying to get H's attention. I was too terrified to speak, and the bear went from sitting to all fours, not looking away from us once. H quickly swung me around so I was behind him, and he just started yelling. Being in the military, he knows how to yell, and the grizzly wasn't quite fazed by it, as it started to slowly walk towards us. At this point, I was on the verge of passing out from terror. This bear was about 5 feet in front of us when we heard a loud crack coming from the woods to our right. The bear heard it too, and then he just bolted towards the stream. A second crack boomed again, this time much closer than before. H said that it's probably just some falling branches, but I think we both knew that that wasn't the case. At this point, we were walking quickly up the trail in an attempt to create some distance from the grizzly, and also those strange noises. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up though, and at that same moment, H stopped moving in front of me. He turned around to look at me, and I turned to look behind me, and to this day, we are not sure what we saw. Back where we were standing was a large black or brown mass is the only way I could describe it. It looked to be 3 times bigger than the already large grizzly that we had seen just a few moments before. Its back was facing us, and then it stood on its back legs, and it looked similar to a bear, but something about the shape of it was just off. At this point, it was probably stupid to run away, but this is exactly what we did. We were aware of heavy footsteps behind us, but neither of us looked back. The footsteps eventually faded, and I was a complete mess afterwards. H was doing his best to console me. Honey, this is extremely unusual. The bears usually stay away from humans. We're going to be okay. I'm sure that won't happen again. And that was enough to convince me to continue on the backpack. Not another hour later, though, we reached a clearing where we decided to take a rest and eat a snack. About a minute after we had sat down, I noticed bushes moving in a line toward the clearing, towards us. Out of the brush comes this adolescent grizzly, who looks just as spooked as I'm sure that we did. But he came straight for us. H, being the crazy nut that he is too, decided to charge back at the bear while screaming, bear spray at the ready, and luckily that did the trick, and the bear just ran off. All I could think of, though, was just my luck. But that wasn't even close to what happened the second night. So before we began our backpack, we had to let the ranger station know which trails or route we planned to take. With this information, they usually send a ranger on horseback at some point during the backpack, just to check on you and to make sure everything is okay. There were not many approved trails left for us to choose from, and it was just our luck that they were the difficult ones. And apparently over the 3 days that we were on those trails, we had been the only sole hikers there. We didn't see a single other person once we were on Route 2, which is important. Anyhow, I guess we missed the ranger who came to check on us. We'd been following hoofprints the entire second day, and we hadn't seen any the day before. I had some foot problems, so we spent valuable daylight trying to adjust my boots, laces, and socks to compensate for the pain. When we started on the trail again, we had maybe an hour or 2 of daylight left. And let me tell you that in the woods, it gets dark quickly. I was exhausted too. It was dark out, and H was the only one with a working headlamp, as mine wouldn't even turn on for some reason. We needed to find somewhere to set up camp, as we still needed to eat, and it was freezing, and the wind was blowing. It was creating a sort of howling sound as it rushed through the trees, which made it difficult to hear H or discern any of the sounds coming from the woods. After another hour of hiking through the dark, we eventually found a clearing. Well, it was more like a bowl, I would say. It looked to be about 200 meters in diameter, if I had to guess, with the sides being about 10 meters down from the trail to the bottom of the clearing. And this place was really strange. We both felt it too, though he didn't tell me how freaked he was till after we had left. There was no moonlight, so all we had was the illumination from his headlamp, our small camp stove, and the flashlight that I fished from my pack. Half of the trees were dead or fallen, just in the bowl. The vegetation everywhere was very dense. But to help alleviate my anxiousness, he started playing Ninja Sex Party out of his portable speaker. This didn't help much, quite honestly, as it just echoed off the trees, creating a dissonance of sounds. He also thought it would ward off any predators nearby, and I think this is when we knew that our anxiousness wasn't paranoia. At some stage, though, the silence came back. There hadn't been a single bird chirp since we arrived at the clearing. It also may have had something to do with the obnoxious music, I admit, but because of our previous experience, we decided to turn off the music and head into the tent. Also, I really want to emphasize that it was freezing. As soon as we were situated in our sleeping bags, we began hearing deep cracks and thuds echoing from behind the tree line. Falling trees, I thought. There had been a lot of wildfires not too long ago, and very little rain this season, so it was possible. But then, we heard a thud, and whatever it was big. We both froze because that sound definitely wasn't an echo. It came from inside the clearing, and definitely not a falling tree. Then we heard another thud, this time closer and much more loud. It came from right outside of our tent, and we both stopped breathing at this stage. H's hand found mine, and we clung to each other, paralyzed, when something dragged across the outside of our tent, making an indent as it went along. It was thin, almost like a finger maybe. I whispered, shaking. "What is it?" "I don't know. It shouldn't be a person. We're the only ones on the side of this mountain." I was trying my hardest to stifle sobs, trying to listen to what was outside. I could hear steps, but couldn't decipher what it was. The steps stopped, and then the whole side of the tent was slowly pushed inwards. At this point, whatever was outside knew that we were in there, so I shined my flashlight at the side of the tent, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was the shape of a human face pressed into the tent wall. I could make out the nose and an open mouth, and each time they breathed, it made the tent around their mouth billow in and out. H said, "Fuck that," and pulled a Glock from his sleeping bag. He cocked it, and the sound shattered the silence. The face pulled back, and we heard fast footsteps heading towards the edge of the clearing. We sat there, just frozen in fear, listening for everything and every movement. We didn't leave the tent until the sun was shining the next morning, and the first thing that we noticed was the smell of urine. We came out of the tent and looked around, and whoever it was had peed on our coals that we had left in the fire, leaving a disgusting stench of evaporated piss. Footprints surrounded our tent, circling around multiple times. Muddy handprints decorated the outside of our tent, and we think it was mud anyway, but who really knows? After this experience, we cut our trek short and we made our way back. We informed the rangers of what had happened, and we obviously didn't tell them, well, everything, because we would have sounded crazy, but we told them that we thought that somebody was out there. I guess the takeaway, though, is that wildlife probably isn't the most dangerous thing in the backcountry. So I'd like to preface this by saying that I was young and drunk for the most part of this, so my bad decision-making, while annoying I admit, was not out of pure ignorance. I was 20, female, at an anime convention. My 21st birthday was coming up a month later, so my roommates decided to let me, well, get smashed as long as I stayed in the room or left with someone that I trusted. I was staying with a large group of people in one of the nicer hotel rooms there. I'd been to quite a lot of conventions and never really had a bad experience, outside of a few cosplay creepers and terrible people at times. But the weekend went pretty normal, except that I was drunk and my group was throwing small parties. On the night of a particularly not-so-fun one too, I decided to drunkenly leave the room and go roam around the main lobby. And that was when I met Stephen. I still have no idea how old Stephen was, but he was at least an adult, maybe a little older than me. We ran into each other at a manga table, and he mentioned how he loved the manga that I was holding. I didn't really read manga and just liked the artwork. I'm an anime Andy, but I still listened to him gush about the story for a few because, whatever, he seems nice enough. I didn't say much to him outside of, "Oh yeah, and that sounds really cool." I thanked him for the info and I walked away. After an hour or so of roaming around, I decided to head back up to my room. Back in my room, I had taken 2 shots with my roomies and was laying on the couch when we got a knock on the door. The music and the talking quietened down as it was customary to shush when somebody knocked, in case of con security coming to shut down our party. That's when my roommate who answered the door said, "Veronica?" "Yeah, she's here, come on in." Followed by silence, and then my roommate calling my name and telling me someone is here for you. Now, 2 things drunk me didn't think about were the fact that I didn't tell Stephen my name. Our interactions lasted 5 minutes max, and I gave no information to him. On top of that, my name is more complicated and hard to pronounce. The one that I gave here is fake. But maybe I assumed that he just described me, and my roommate knew who he was talking about. But I didn't give him my room number. No, we were several floors up in the suites area. You'd have to take a different elevator to get to the room than you would get to a standard hotel room. Like I said, though, I definitely didn't think about that. Instead, I just walked to the door, and there Stephen was, smiling. He asked me to go for a walk with him, and I drunkenly said yes. I mean, he's just an awkward anime dude who just wanted a friend to hang out with. We were walking, and he was talking to me about how he recently was watching an anime where the protagonist wouldn't stop killing the girl that he liked. I've since Googled that anime plot, and have not been able to find one similar to what he was talking about, outside of some Yandir anime or something. But I got a little creeped out as the hall was empty and we were walking with no plan of where he was going. But he then began to talk about his favourite serial killers, how he was a huge crime junkie and how he followed a lot of cases. A big red flag went off in my head at this, and I decided that it was time to try to go back to my room. But then he stopped walking and just sort of stared at me. You know, I know a really cool spot that we can go. If you take the staff elevator, you can go all the way up to the top of the hotel. It's really pretty. And all of a sudden, he was breathing a little oddly and his hands were shaking. I said no, as I had some sense left in my head still. But then he grabbed my arm as hard as he could and started pulling me, yanking me towards the staff doors. I instinctively pulled back, asking him to stop, and he told me to just be quiet. I yanked free of him and started running. He chased after me, telling me to stop. I was nearly in tears at this point, and wondering why the hallways were so empty at one of the most crowded cons that I'd ever went to. When I finally ran into a group of girls, they saw the fear on my face and immediately pulled me into their group, asking me about the hair and the makeup, wrapping their arms around me. I was crying, telling them what had just happened, and when I looked back, Stephen, he was gone. I didn't see him for the rest of the con, but I stopped being so friendly at cons because of him after that. I would also like to say that Stephen is the name that I gave him, but I never got his name personally. I told con security about him, and my roommates and friends used the buddy system with me for the rest of the convention. I would like to say that the guy was caught and something happened to him, but the truth is that I think that he got away. So I'm a 26-year-old female, and I live in the northwest of the United States, 4 hours drive above Salt Lake City. I'm going to sum this up a bit, but I have religious people, mostly Mormons, come to my door from time to time. I'm always polite to them and listen to what they have to say and just say no thank you at the end. But yesterday, I had 3 guys come to my door. They were, I think, 16 to 18, maybe older, and wearing nice dress clothes. They stated that they were Mormon and started off by stating that they were trying to get a law passed to increase taxes for unmarried individuals versus married couples. I stated that taxes are already higher if you are single. They asked what do I do and if I felt loved and accepted. I replied that I'm in college pursuing my bachelor's degree, and yes, I do feel loved and I'm not always accepted. They said that they know what it's like to feel like they're not accepted and that their group could help. Their group has love, and since I'm not married, they said that they could have a husband arranged for me, that I would get to pick a husband from 5 different suitors of their choosing, and would never have to work a day in my life, and you'll never be lonely again. I could just be a housewife, and wouldn't have to do their 18-month recruitment, as long as I produce a child within 2 years. I said, I already have a significant other, and I'm not lonely, so they asked if we were going to be married within 6 months because they could have me guaranteed to be married within the time period. I said, I don't know, this is not my decision to make, and we're content where we are. They then said, well, he can also have another wife to assist with the housework, so you'll never be overwhelmed. I said that we are monogamous and fine with where we are. They said that he could come work for them, and he could go to trade school paid for by them. However, he would have to give like 10 to 50%, or 15%, maybe I misheard that, of his income to the church, to go to food banks, healthcare, and anything that we would need. They then said, or you could entice an outsider into joining us, but if you become married and decide to leave, you'll be cut off from the church and everyone. Obviously, I said no thank you to this. I'm not interested in joining your group. They said that that's okay if I wanted to join, that they'll be around. My significant other told his co-worker, who was Mormon, about it, and he said that yes, Mormons take 10% of your income to help with food banks and those in need, but nothing like that. And he insisted that it must be a cult. Now, I've seen cults on TV like the Heaven's Gate cult or the crazy ones that get busted by the feds, but I never thought that I would come into contact with one in my life. Weirdly too, they were holding their hands together and very persistent the entire time. Just really creepy. What do you guys think though? Is this a cult? Should I be worried? Should I tell authorities? I really don't know what to do. In 2017, my family moved to an older house. It was in rough shape, but the landlord promised to fix it up. We didn't have a lot of money, and it was in our budget, but we took it out of desperation, really. The house sat on a hill by itself, fenced in with a huge hill and a clubhouse. Each room only had 1 or 2 wall lights, and none from the ceiling. But strange things started happening shortly after we moved in. First, my kids discovered multiple angel figurines in a circle inside the clubhouse. It was odd, but I chalked it up to the previous tenants' kids doing weird things. The basement to the house was weird, and we had to walk around the outside of the house along to the side porch to a small door, and that led to the basement. The basement was, honestly, basically like someone had dug underneath the house and had no floors or lights. Just a person-sized space where you could walk around about 100 feet in front, and that was it. When my teenage daughter and myself went to look inside, there were old funeral flowers and arrangements inside. Shortly after moving in, a real heaviness set in as well. The air was always heavy and filled with dread. And plus, my once happy family just went to depression and not speaking. My marriage started to suffer, and it felt like no matter what, we could not be happy while inside there. We had 4 dogs, a German Shepherd, a Pit Bull, a Chihuahua, and a Terrier mix. All 4 dogs followed me wherever I went and made a circle around my feet. If I went to the kitchen, they were there. Dining room eating, the dogs would lay at my feet. Even if I went to the bathroom too, the dogs would make a circle around me in the toilet. They stood at my side and just refused to move. It wasn't long after that as well that the electrical problem started. We would hear zaps and buzzing coming from the breaker box. Multiple calls to the landlord. She would send someone out to fix it. The fixes just didn't last long. We had to leave one weekend too because the problem was so bad that my husband feared that we were going to die in an electrical fire. Around Christmas time, our oldest son ran into my bedroom scared and crying because he apparently saw a lady in a nightgown staring at him through the living room window. My husband and I checked the entire property, but we found no woman or any evidence of her. It was a few months before my family moved that I started having the nightmares. I would dream of setting the house on fire and dying within it, just sitting on the bed while the flames burnt me. I couldn't sleep at night because of them, and my husband started having the same thoughts, and we both just wanted to die in the house. My father-in-law started having hallucinations. He would scream that the rooms were on fire. He would watch a funeral take place in our front yard when there wasn't one. He would talk to himself and poured bleach into a pot of soup beans that I was cooking. It got so bad, in fact, that I took all the knives and hid them in my purse while myself and my husband and our 4 kids slept in one bedroom with the door locked, scared of him. We honestly believed that he was going to kill us at one point, and every passing day, things were just getting worse. The ideas of killing ourselves grew stronger, and finally we just couldn't take it anymore. We found a new place to rent, and walking away from that house was honestly like a weight was lifted. Every step got easier to breathe, and I started to smile more. A month after we moved, my cousin sent me a Facebook message. It was a post from one of the old neighbors, because apparently that house was on fire, and the picture taken was from the back bedroom. That was my children's room, where the breaker box was. No one set the fire, and no one was living in it. But I truly believe that that house was evil, and just wanted to burn. Since moving, my dogs no longer surround me, my marriage has improved immensely, and my father-in-law no longer has those hallucinations. So I'll start by saying that I personally did not witness or experience this, but the story comes from a close family friend whom I consider reputable and quite honest. Personally, I'm rather skeptical when it comes to most paranormal activity, but I do believe this story because of the man who told it. So, as a little bit of background, my father was a police officer for 25 years through the 80s and 90s. His best friends were mostly officers, so growing up I always met and was around cops. Some of my father's cop friends were annoying and rude, and some were really squared away nice guys. One in particular, though, was my favourite. I won't use his real name, so I'll just call him Bob. Bob was one of my father's closest friends and beat partner for a long time. He was an older African-American man from New Orleans. He was polite, had great mannerisms, and carried himself confidently. My father used to say that he was the most honest cop that he'd ever worked with and had solid integrity and a lot of bravery too. Now, one night, my father and him worked on an off-duty at a local event, some sort of a carnival or fair or something. I can't really remember exactly, but there was a clown there. My father told me the entire night Bob was acting really strange, acting uncomfortable, quiet, and really shy. When my father asked him what was wrong, Bob said, "I just hate clowns, always have." My father started poking fun at him for being scared of the clown, and he said Bob just stared at him with this look that he had never seen him do before, like he was genuinely afraid. So my father asked why, and this was Bob's story. So Bob grew up in New Orleans, and when he was a child, his mum took him to stay at his aunt's house for a few weeks. Bob said that he didn't care much for his aunt. She wasn't mean to him or anything, but he always just got a strange vibe when around her. Like, she sort of carried an evil aura around her. His family used to joke that this aunt was involved in voodoo and black magic, but they mostly just said these things in jest. His time at his aunt's was largely uneventful, with the exception of a strange rule that she had. He was not allowed in the kitchen. Bob didn't understand why, but he followed it. On some nights, Bob claimed that he heard his aunt talking to people in the kitchen at really odd hours, and in the mornings he would question his aunt if she had friends over, and she would say that she didn't. His aunt had a thing for dolls as well, and she had them just everywhere around the house, and he absolutely hated them. He said that whenever he passed by cabinets displaying them, he always felt like he was being watched. But she had this one doll that she always carried around and protected like a treasure. And you probably guessed it by now, but it was a clown doll. He said that his aunt loved this thing and always took it with her around the house, caring for it like it was a child. He didn't understand why. It was ugly and horrible looking, and he was frightened by that one the most. Now, one night he said that he smelt his aunt baking something sweet and conversing with someone in the kitchen. He got excited and ran into the kitchen without thinking about his aunt's rule, and when he ran in, he saw on the counter the clown doll. It was moving its mouth and speaking to his aunt in a man's voice. The clown turned its head and looked at Bob. His aunt turned around frantically and scolded him out of the kitchen, and he said that as his aunt rushed him out of the kitchen, he heard the clown doll laughing. After that night, he never left his room and barely slept there. His aunt claimed that he was imagining seeing the clown talk. He never went back after the incident, too. My father, who was a big-time paranormal skeptic, believes Bob, and he said that he'd never seen Bob's eyes or body language display just so much discomfort and fear. He looked my dad square in the eyes and said, I know what I saw and I know how it sounds, but I'm telling you, it happened. That doll was alive. Whether you choose to believe it or not, I do, because I know Bob, and he's just not the kind of guy to make something up or claim something that he wasn't for sure about. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this story, and if I get any more info, I'll let you guys know.